The bread always told Nella when something was wrong. Not because it spoke, or because she was the sort of woman who believed in signs, but she had been baking on Hathaway Station for 11 years, and she knew the way the air moved through the kitchen vents, the way the smell of rosemary dough spread down the corridor toward the docking bays, the way the whole station settled into a kind of quiet when nothing unusual was happening. That morning, the air tasted like rust. She noticed it while shaping the second batch. She pressed her palms into the dough, folded it, turned it, and paused. Rust and something cold, like the inside of a sealed room that hadn't been opened in a long time. She went back to work. It wasn't her business. It became her business 40 minutes later, when Rowan came running through the kitchen door, nearly knocked over the flour rack, and said, too fast, that the salvage team had found a derelict Dravosi ship on the outer sensor edge, and there was something alive in it. Nella put the dough down. Alive how? Rowan opened his mouth, closed it. I think you should just come. She brought the bread tray with her because it had 2 more minutes before it burned. The docking corridor was full of people trying to look calm and failing. Director Fenn was talking to 3 different people at once, his voice low and tight. Dent, the station engineer, was standing near the far wall with all 4 arms crossed, which meant he was uncomfortable. The salvage team was clustered near Bay 3, not going back in. Nella set the tray on a crate by the wall and walked to Bay 3. Wait, Fenn said. Nella, we don't know what. She had already walked through the door. The salvage shuttle was still pressurized from its return trip. The inner bay smelled like old metal and something that was not quite animal and not quite smoke. The lights were still flickering from the emergency override. 6 cracked egg casings sat against the far wall of the shuttle's cargo compartment, pale and dry and clearly long cold. The 7th was not cracked, it was open. What had come out of it was sitting in the middle of the floor, looking up at her. It was the size of a large dog, maybe a little bigger. Its scales were amber and pale gold, the kind of color that reminded her of afternoon light through old glass. It had 2 large eyes and wings that were still soft and not yet unfolded all the way. One of its front feet was turned slightly inward, the way a very young thing holds a limb when it doesn't quite have control of it yet. It looked at the bread tray. Nella looked at the bread tray. She looked back at the creature. It sneezed, a small, undignified sound. Then it looked up at her again, and she had been around enough hungry things in her life, station strays, underfed crew on long rotations, her own daughter once after a week of illness, to know exactly what that look meant. She pulled a roll off the tray, set it on the floor, stepped back. The creature stretched its neck toward it carefully, like it expected the roll to move. Then it ate it whole, then it looked at her again. She set down 2 more. By the time Fenn appeared in the doorway behind her, his voice 6 notes above where it usually sat, asking her to please step back slowly and not make any sudden movements. The creature had eaten 4 rolls and moved close enough to press its warm side against Nella's leg. It's hungry, she said. It's a Dravosi hatchling, Fenn said. Nella, a Dravosi hatchling. I know what it is, Aldrich. The Dravosi Empire has a standing. I know. She didn't move. The creature's warmth was spreading through her knee and up into her hip, like sitting next to a fire. Get Rowan in here with a scanner and bring the rest of that batch from the kitchen. The rosemary ones, not the plain. You cannot feed it like it's a stray cat. She looked at the creature. Its eyes were half closed now. It was still leaning against her. It's already eating, she said. The question now is what comes next. Fenn left. She heard him in the corridor, very quietly, telling someone to call the Galactic Council relay station. She heard Dent ask if the creature was dangerous. She heard Rowan say he wasn't sure, but that it seemed calm. The hatchling made a low sound, not a growl, not a hiss. Something in the middle, soft and formless, the sound of something that was tired and had been alone for a long time. Nella sat down on the bay floor. The creature looked at her, then folded itself down beside her, tucked its head against its chest, and exhaled. The bread on the tray was going cold. She reached over and pulled the tray closer, let the creature smell it. It opened one eye. "You're going to need a name," she said. She didn't have one yet, but that was a problem for later. Right now the bread was there, and the creature was still, and the rust taste in the air had faded into something warmer. That was enough for now. Nobody gave Nella official permission to bring the hatchling into the kitchen. Nobody stopped her either. Fen had spent 3 days trying to reach the Galactic Council and had received one automated reply, 2 redirects, and a message that said the primary contact line for interspecies biological incidents was currently operating with reduced staff. He had taped a printed copy of the relevant Accord regulations to his door, read through them twice, found no section titled "What to Do if a human feeds a Dravosi hatchling bread," and quietly decided that Nella was the only option until someone told him otherwise. The hatchling had refused to go anywhere without her. It had also refused to stay in the docking bay. It had knocked over a fuel line connection, sat on 2 equipment cases, and pulled the insulation off a ventilation pipe before Dent had given up watching it and gone to find Nella himself. So the kitchen it was. Pritha, Nella's sous chef, stood in the doorway when they arrived and looked at the creature for a long time. "No," she said. "It's temporary," Nella said. "You said the same thing about the condensation problem in the cold storage, and that was 4 years ago." Nella moved the creature past her. It was already looking at the oven. She named it Sovra that first night because it came to her while she was watching the creature circle the kitchen counter for the 4th time, curious about everything, afraid of nothing. It meant above in a very old language she barely remembered her grandmother using. It felt right for something that should, by all accounts, be terrifying, but kept doing things like getting its nose stuck in an empty mixing bowl and sneezing flour across the floor. Sovra learned by watching. That was the first thing Nella noticed. When she moved, Sovra watched. When she measured, Sovra's eyes tracked the cup, the bowl, the pour. When she needed, Sovra sat 3 feet away and stared at her hands with an expression she could only describe as focused. It did not try to touch anything at first, it only watched. On the 4th day, Rowan came in with a borrowed translation device, a second-hand piece of equipment with a wide-range setting designed for multi-species medical use. He had been reading about Dravosi hatchling language, which was apparently ancient and only partially catalogued. He turned it on, looked at Sovra, said in carefully enunciated galactic standard, "Can you understand me?" Sovra looked at him, then looked at Nella, then looked at the bread cooling on the rack. "Right," Rowan said. They tried for an hour. What they got, eventually, was not words, but sounds low and warm and almost musical, that the translation device, after some processing, tagged as the Dravosi hatchling equivalent of communication. Meaning, the creature was talking, they just didn't have enough language data to know what it was saying. The first word that came through clearly was Nella's name, not the word Nella. It could not form human sounds, but a specific sound that it made only when looking at her or reaching toward her, different from every other sound. Rowan tagged it. It was consistent. It was a name. The second thing that translated clearly was the sound it made while looking at the bread. Rowan checked the database. Closest match, a Dravosi root word meaning warm good thing. The third was the sound it made when it wanted more of the warm good thing. "It's a language," Rowan said, scribbling notes with the energy of someone who had found something extraordinary. "A real one. It's just very focused right now on you and the bread." "Most important things on the station," Pritha said from across the kitchen, not looking up. On day 6, a relay message came through. The Galactic Council had logged the incident. A Dravosi emissary ship had been notified of the derelict and its contents. ETA, 11 days. Fen delivered this news to Nella personally. She was teaching Sovra what flour was. Specifically, she was showing it how to feel the texture between its claws, which Sovra was doing with great concentration, its head tilted, Its enormous eyes narrowed like it was solving something. 11 days, Fen said. All right, Nella said. Nella, the Dravosi Empire. I know, Aldrich. They're going to want it back. Sovra sneezed. Flour went everywhere. It looked at the cloud it had made, then at Nella, with an expression that was so clearly startled and embarrassed that Pritha made a sound from across the room that was, despite everything, a laugh. Cleanup is part of it, Nella told Sovra. She handed it a cloth. Sovra looked at the cloth, looked at the flour on the floor, pressed the cloth to the floor once, looked up at her. Keep going, she said. It kept going. That night very late, after the station had quieted and the kitchen lights were turned down low, Nella sat on the floor with her back against the counter. Sovra lay beside her, too large now for a proper curl, one wing draped loosely on the floor. She talked, she didn't mean to, it just happened the way it sometimes did late at night, when she was tired and the station was still. She talked about the bread recipes her mother had taught her on a cold little colony world, about the 11 years on Hearthway, about how she had come here because she needed to go somewhere that felt like it was always moving forward, even when she was standing still. Sovra made a low sound, not a word the device could catch, just a sound that meant, I hear you, I am here. Nella leaned her head back against the cabinet and closed her eyes. She had not told anyone about her daughter yet, but she thought, for the first time in a long time, that she might. Ambassador Gora Vin arrived 4 days early. His ship did not send a full docking request. It sent a single-line transit notice that translated, roughly, as, we are coming, prepare the bay. The Dravosi were not a species that asked for things. Fen had 3 hours to prepare. He spent most of it writing procedural notes he would not use. Rowan stress-cleaned the medical bay. Dent went very quiet and checked that all 4 of his arms were doing something useful at all times. Nella made extra bread. Vin was enormous. That was the first thing anyone noticed, not his rank insignia, not the formal sash across his chest, not the old claw scars running down the right side of his jaw, just his size. He filled the docking corridor the way a piece of load-bearing architecture fills a room. He was not young. His scales had the deep bronze-brown color of very old metal, and he walked with the particular steadiness of something that had survived long enough to stop hurrying. He spoke through a translation collar. His voice underneath it was low and resonant, like sound traveling through stone. He told Fen, calmly, that the hatchling was the property of the Dravosi Empire and would be returned to proper care immediately. Fen said he understood and asked if the ambassador would like to assess the situation firsthand before any formal proceedings. Vin agreed. He was clearly expecting to walk into a docking bay and find a distressed, possibly feral, certainly compromised hatchling. Nella heard them coming from the kitchen. She did not stop what she was doing. Sovra heard them too. Its head came up, ears flattening, and then it looked at Nella and she said, "You're fine, keep pressing," and it looked back at the dough in front of it and pressed. Vin stepped into the kitchen doorway. He stopped. Sovra was wearing a small linen apron. Nella had made it on the 3rd night because Sovra kept leaning over the counter and getting dough on its chest scales, which then dried and flaked into the next batch, which was not acceptable. The apron was amber-colored, roughly fitted, tied at the back in a way that Sovra had learned to hold still for. It had flour on it. Sovra was pressing dough, both front claws, flat, rocking forward the way Nella had shown it twice that morning, with its whole attention on the surface beneath its feet. Vin looked at the apron, he looked at the dough, he looked at Nella. Nella nodded at him the way she nodded at everyone who came into her kitchen. Then she looked back at the bread. Fen said quietly, "Ambassador." Vin came into the kitchen. He stood in the center of it, and he was so large that the proportions of the room changed around him, and he watched Sovra work for a long moment without speaking. Then he told Fen, in a voice that had gone slightly flat, that what he was seeing was not consistent with standard Dravosi hatchling development, that hatchlings of this age should be in territorial assessment, that they should be demonstrating dominance, instinct, and survival response, that they should not, under any circumstances, be wearing fabric and pressing food. Pritha from behind the counter said nothing but filled a cup with coffee and set it on the edge of the counter within Vin's reach. She didn't ask if he wanted it. He looked at it. He did not touch it yet. Nella said without looking up, "It's eating well and sleeping regular hours. It communicates. It pays attention. I'm not sure what the problem is." "The problem," Vin said, "is that this creature is being made soft." The word he used translated directly as soft, but carried layers of meaning: unsuitable, diminished, unable, a thing that could not survive. Nella put down the rolling pin. She looked at Vin, he looked back at her. She said, "It's alive. It was alone in a cold cargo hold for 6 weeks, and it survived. Now it's warm and it's eating and it's learning things. What exactly is your objection?" Vin had not, in 30 years of diplomatic service, been spoken to that way by someone who came up to his collarbone. He did not answer immediately. Sovra finished pressing its section of dough. It looked up. It saw Vin for the first time, really looked at him, with those amber eyes wide and curious and completely unafraid. Then it did what it always did when the bread was ready to rest. It looked for Nella. She nodded at it. It stepped back from the counter. Then, without any prompting, without any instruction, it reached up and took one of the resting rolls from the tray that had baked an hour earlier. It carried it carefully in both front claws, crossed the kitchen floor, and held it up toward Vin. The roll was lopsided. The crust was a little dark on one side. Sovra had shaped that one itself, the first solo attempt that morning. Vin looked at the roll for a long time. "It made that one," Nella said, "first batch by itself." Vin reached down and took it from Sovra's claws. He looked at it, he looked at Sovra. Sovra sat back on its haunches and waited with the specific patience of something that had learned that good things come if you wait for them. Vin took a slow bite. The kitchen was very quiet. He said nothing about the taste. He said nothing about anything, but he did not leave. He sat down on the crate near the back wall, which creaked dangerously under him, and he drank the coffee Pritha had left, and he watched Nella go back to work. Pritha refilled his cup without being asked. He drank that one too. Vin started coming to the kitchen at odd hours. Not during the scheduled baking times. He was careful about that, as if appearing during working hours meant something he was not ready to admit. He came when the station was quiet, when the corridor lights dimmed for the rest cycle, when the only sounds were the ventilation and the low hum of the outer hull. He came, Rowan noted in his records, every single night. Sovra always knew when he was nearby before he appeared. Its ears would shift, then it would keep doing whatever it was doing, which was the thing Vin seemed to find most confusing. He clearly expected the hatchling to react to his presence the way Dravosi young was supposed to, with challenge or with fear or with some kind of territorial signal. Instead, Sovra would glance at him, determine he was not Nella and not carrying bread, and go back to whatever it was learning. It was learning a great deal. Dent, the engineer, had started coming around during his afternoon shift checks, which he claimed were routine. He had started leaving small metal objects near the machine bay entrance: a polished gear, a spare calibration weight, a defunct sensor chip with a reflective surface. Sovra had found them and moved them all into a corner of the kitchen behind the large flour storage, where it apparently kept things it considered interesting. Dent had never said anything to Sovra directly, but twice Nella had heard him, from the corridor, narrating what each tool was for in a low voice, while Sovra examined whatever he had left that day. "It's collecting things," Rowan said, standing at the kitchen entrance one afternoon with his notebook open. "That's a bonding behavior in Dravosi young. It means it trusts a specific space, and whoever is associated with that space." "It's a hatchling," Nella said. "It's a Dravosi hatchling," Rowan said, as if this were a meaningful distinction. "Their adults are apex predators with territorial ranges in the hundreds of kilometers, and this one is hoarding machine parts and bread scraps in your kitchen corner." "What's your point, Rowan?" He looked at his notes. I don't have one. I just keep writing things down and hoping the point shows up eventually. Vin finally asked Rowan directly about human behavior one afternoon near the water station in the main corridor. He did not acknowledge that they had passed each other every day for a week. He simply stopped and said, "Your people attach to things that are injured." Rowan said, "Sometimes." "Why?" Rowan thought about it honestly. "I think because we understand what it means to need something and not have it. So when we see a need we can actually meet, we meet it." Vin looked at him for a moment, then he walked away. But that evening, he came to the kitchen during working hours for the first time, and he sat on his crate and watched without saying anything, and Nella let him. Then came the day Sovra produced fire. It was not dramatic. The oven was running low, one of the heating elements had started to fade, and Nella had been meaning to ask Dent to fix it, but hadn't yet. The dough needed a hotter surface, or it would sit too long and the crust would go wrong. She said so out loud, mostly to herself, the way she narrated the kitchen process without thinking about it. Sovra looked at the oven, then it stepped close. It made a small, precise sound in the back of its throat, something Nella had never heard before. Then, from between its back teeth, it produced a narrow, controlled burst of heat, yellow gold at the edges, very short, aimed directly at the heating element's intake vent. Nella checked the temperature gauge. The oven was exactly where she needed it to be. Sovra looked at her, waiting. "Good," she said. "Now don't do that near the flour bags." Sovra looked at the flour bags, back at her. It moved 2 steps away from them. She was certain it had been doing this for days before she noticed. She told Dent that night, and he made a sound that, for a Thalaki, translated roughly to, "I knew it." She told Rowan, and he immediately filled 3 pages of notes. She told Fen, and he sat down. She didn't tell Vin directly, but Vin had been in the kitchen 3 evenings later when Sovra did it again, oven regulation, brief and accurate, and she had watched him watch it with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not alarm, not disapproval. Something quieter, something she recognized a little. That night, after everyone had gone, she and Vin sat at opposite ends of the kitchen, in a silence that had, over 2 weeks, stopped being uncomfortable. He asked her without preamble, "You lost something." She looked at him. "Before this," he said, "you carry it the way my people carry old wounds, internally, without display." She was quiet for a moment. "A daughter," she said, "7 years ago, transit accident." Vin said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "We do not speak of lost young. Among my people, it is considered a private grief." "Same for most of mine," Nella said. "But you did not stop," he said. "You did not close." She looked over at the flour storage corner where Sovra kept its collection of small things, which now included a rinsed-out dough scraper, 3 of Dent's spare parts, a piece of thermal wrap, and one of Rowan's pens that had gone missing 2 weeks ago. "You don't stop making room," she said. "That's all it is, you just don't stop." Vin was quiet again. His breath moved slow and heavy in the warm air of the kitchen. "My people," he said finally, "have always made the rooms smaller." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside, the station hummed. The bread for the next morning was already rising. The relay broadcast opened with 47 simultaneous connection requests. By the time the Galactic Council chamber moderator called for order, there were 212 species that had never logged interest in a standard cultural review hearing, species that had been following the incident through secondary channels, through diplomatic relay chatter, through a short clip someone had recorded on a personal scanner of Sovra carrying a bread tray across the hearthway kitchen and setting it down in exactly the right place without being told. That clip had been shared 600 times across the Accord relay network. Nobody on the station had known until Rowan checked the external traffic and went very pale. The hearing was called to formal order. The moderator, a Talari, calm and precise, with the elongated fingers of her species folded neatly in front of her, introduced the matter as a biologically sensitive first contact review under Article 9 of the Interspecies Accord. The Dravosi Empire's lead council voice was a senior official named Orders. She was older than Vin, with the formal collar of the High Council and a voice that carried the weight of 300 years of precedent. Orders opened by stating that the hatchling designated in the registry was a citizen of the Dravosi Empire under birthright law, that its unregulated contact with a non-Dravosi handler for an extended period during critical developmental stages constituted interference, that the Empire was requesting return of the hatchling and an investigation into the incident. It was polite language for, "You took something that belongs to us." Fen gave the station's opening statement. He was careful, diplomatic, and visibly sweating. He said that the station had acted under emergency protocols for biological life signs encountered on a derelict vessel, that contact with the handler had been immediate and circumstantial, that the hatchling's welfare had been the primary concern. Orders asked if they would now be returning it. Fen said that was the subject of the review. Then Nella was called. She walked into the relay camera's frame wearing her work clothes. She had flour on her left sleeve. She had noticed it but left it. The station crew, watching from the side corridor, did not say anything. The moderator asked her to describe the nature of the contact. Nella said, "It was hungry, I fed it. It stayed near me, so I kept it near me. I taught it what I know, which is mostly cooking. That's the whole of it." There was a pause. One of the non-Dravosi council voices asked if she had intended to establish a bond with the creature. "I didn't intend anything," she said. "I saw something that needed something I had. I gave it." Another council voice, from a species she didn't recognize, asked if she understood the developmental implications of extended contact with a Dravosi hatchling during early formation. She said she had read what Rowan had printed out for her, that she understood the hatchling had formed attachment patterns that were not typical of Dravosi young, that she understood this was what the concern was about. Orders spoke. She said that the hatchling had been, as she put it, conditioned away from its nature, that softness in a Dravosi hatchling was not a neutral quality, that it would not be able to function in Dravosi society, that what had happened here had, with no malice but with great consequence, produced a creature that was less than what it should be. The relay chamber was quiet. Nella opened her mouth. Sovra moved first. It had been at the edge of the camera frame the whole time, sitting at Nella's left side, calm in the way it had learned to be calm in the kitchen, still and attentive, not nervous. When it heard Orders' voice, when the translator in the room rendered the words, its ears had shifted. It had understood something. Now it stood up to its full height, and it was not small anymore, not after 4 months, and it moved to stand directly in front of Nella. One foreleg came forward and planted on the floor between her and the camera. Not threatening, not aggressive, precise. It was positioning. This is mine, and I am hers, and I am standing here so you understand. The relay chamber made a sound, not words, just the sound of 212 connections reacting at once. Orders said nothing. The moderator waited. Then Vin spoke. He had not been listed as a speaker. He was present as the diplomatic observer, but he opened his channel and the moderator, after a brief pause, allowed it. He said, in the formal register of High Dravosi, that the translation collars rendered in flattened standard. "I have spent 23 days aboard this station. I came to assess and retrieve. I stayed because I observed something I had no language for." He paused. "We measure our young by how quickly they learn to dominate. We have done this for as long as we have kept records. It works. Our young are strong. Our empire endures." Another pause. "This hatchling is not weak. It is larger than average for its age. Its fire response is controlled and deliberate. Its spatial reasoning is advanced. By any metric we use, it is exceptional. It is also," he said, "the only hatchling I have observed in 30 years of service that offered food to an enemy." Nobody had called Vin an enemy. He used the word deliberately. The relay chamber understood. It did not know he was not an enemy, he continued, and Nella realized he was talking about himself. It saw a large, unfamiliar, scarred creature in its space, and it brought him bread, because that is what it had learned to do when something arrived. Not challenge, not assess, offer. He let that sit. I do not know if we have been measuring correctly, he said. I am saying so on this record so that someone considers it. The Galactic Council did not rule cleanly, they never did, but they ruled that the case warranted extended review, that custody would remain with Hathaway Station pending a full cultural assessment period, that both parties would submit quarterly documentation. What they meant, Rowan said later, was that they wanted to see what this became. When the relay closed, the station corridor erupted. Dent made a sound that involved all four arms and his whole body. Pritha made tea. Fen sat down on the floor against the wall and did not explain why. Nella sat down too. Sovra folded itself next to her, tucked its head low and breathed. The next batch needs more salt, she said. Sovra made the sound that meant, I know, I know. 14 months after a dragon hatchling ate its first bread roll on a cold bay floor, Hathaway Station smelled permanently of rosemary. This was not an accident. Sovra had decided, around the 8-month mark, that rosemary was the correct base for the morning batch, and while it did not have the ability to veto Nella's choices, it had developed a way of sitting in front of the rosemary rack with patient, pointed stillness that functioned as a veto in practice. Pritha had started buying extra. Dent had welded a new bracket for the rack because Sovra had accidentally knocked it off the wall twice while helping with the upper shelves. Helping with the upper shelves was necessary because Sovra was now the size of a large vehicle. The kitchen had been restructured around this fact. A section of the east wall had been removed and a new partition installed, giving the space a wider footprint. The oven was the same. The flour was the same. The apron was larger and now required a proper buckle, which Dent had fabricated with no comment and left on the counter one morning without explanation. Everything had changed. The kitchen felt exactly the same. The Dravosi envoy ship arrived on a Tuesday. It was not Vin's ship. He had returned to the Empire months ago after the review period began, but a smaller, cleaner vessel, the kind used for observation and assessment. It carried 4 individuals, a senior hatchling assessor named Borath, 2 junior researchers, and 1 imperial record keeper. They had been sent by the reformist faction, the ones Vin had spoken to on his return, quietly at first, and then louder as it became clear people were listening. There had been debate, not resolution. The Empire did not move quickly, but debate, which was its own kind of revolution. Borath was compact for a Dravosi, practical in his manner, with the air of a scientist more comfortable with data than with politics. He came aboard with a proper greeting, met with Fen without incident, and then asked carefully if he could observe. Nella said yes. She did not change anything. That was her only rule about the observation. They could stand in the kitchen and watch and write whatever they wanted to write, but she would not change the schedule, the method, or the order of things. Borath agreed immediately. He had clearly been briefed to agree. Sovra registered the visitors the way it registered most newcomers, ears up, a long look, categorization, and then back to work. It was deep in the midday batch when they arrived, handling a portion of the dough that required weight and leverage. Tasks it had gradually taken over because it was simply better suited to them than any human in the kitchen. Borath watched in silence for a long time. His junior researchers were writing, the record keeper was recording. Borath himself wrote nothing for the first 40 minutes, he just watched. Then he asked, through his translation collar, when Sovra had first produced fire. Sovra answered before Nella could. In the Dravosi tongue, older and fuller now, richer after months of practice with the translation device, it said something that Borath's collar rendered as, when the oven could not do what was needed, and I understood what was needed. Borath looked at his researchers. One of them wrote something very fast. He asked, and you use it only for this, for cooking. Sovra considered this in the way it considered things now, fully, without rushing. Then it said, translated, I use it for what is useful. The bread requires specific heat. Other things have not required fire. Borath was quiet. You could, he said. You have the capacity. You are physically developed for it. Sovra looked at him. Then it looked at Nella. Then it looked back at Borath with an expression that needed no translation, that Nella had seen on the faces of every sensible person who had ever been offered a pointless option. It said, I know. It went back to the dough. That evening, Vin arrived unexpectedly on the envoy ship. He had not been announced. He walked into the station like he had left yesterday, went directly to the kitchen, and sat on his crate, which had been reinforced twice in the past year to handle the stress. Pritha had coffee ready before he said a word. He and Nella sat in the kitchen after the visitors had gone back to their quarters, and the station had settled into its night rhythms. He told her the debate in the Empire was slow but real, that the reformist faction had submitted a proposal to the High Council, a parallel development study, 17 clutches of hatchlings raised under something closer to what had happened here, monitored carefully, documented fully, not replacing the existing method, alongside it. Not because of the philosophy, he said, as if he needed to clarify, because of the outcomes. The Council responds to outcomes. Nella said, what outcomes are you showing them? You, he said, then after a pause, Sovra. She was quiet. One healthy, large, fire-capable, intellectually advanced hatchling who offered food to a hostile stranger, Vin said, who learned 17 kitchen techniques before it learned to roar, who is not afraid of anything because it spent its early months near something that was not afraid of it. He drank his coffee. These are the outcomes. Nella looked at the proving bowls on the counter. Tomorrow's bread, already rising, slow and patient in the dim kitchen light. She thought about her daughter. She thought about the cold bay floor and a creature the size of a dog pressing its warmth against her knee. She thought about flour going everywhere and Pritha in the doorway and the long months of small, ordinary things that had become something nobody in the galaxy had been prepared for. She thought about how none of it had been a plan. It had just been the next right thing, and then the next, and then the one after that. It's just bread, she said. Vin looked at her. No, he said, it is what you decided bread meant, and then you let something else learn what you decided. Somewhere in the machine bay, Sovra was asleep, breathing deep and even. Dent had placed a new shiny object near its collection corner. The station hummed. The bread rose. In the Dravosi Empire, a proposal moved slowly toward a council chamber. 17 clutches waited. And in a kitchen, on a small backwater station, the most important thing that had happened in 200 years of interspecies history was a batch of rosemary rolls, cooling on a rack, made by a creature that had learned warmth before it learned fire. And knew, without question, which one mattered more.